Thank you for listening to the Supply Chain Doctor Show, where we strive to bring you new ideas and thought leaders and new solution concepts that may not be on your radar. Today, I'm with Ireland Herder, a friend and a fellow industrial engineer. That's what I'm excited about. And she's also a slotting expert, and we'll learn about what slotting means here in a few moments. Before we tell you what slotting is, I'd like you to know why you should be listening to what she has to say. Ireland, what is your background and what do you do?
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. I am an industrial engineer by degree, and I also have a master's in engineering management from the University of Louisville. So, problem solving is definitely the operating system of my life. I currently work with supply chain leaders to help them save time and money in their warehouses and distribution centers through slotting optimization. So I work at Slot 3D, where I actually began as a co-op throughout my engineering studies. And now I work as a business development manager there to empower supply chain teams with slotting software to make data-driven decisions that will directly impact their bottom line to deliver results that reduce travel, increase throughput, and optimize space.
That sounds awesome. I'm not sure what it means, but it sounds great. So why did you get into engineering? What was there an emphasis coming out of high school or what was that motivation?
I was always very math oriented, and my mom actually encouraged me to check out engineering, and it made sense to want to try to solve other people's problems. I like being around people, and I thought industrial engineering was the perfect specific fit within engineering itself. So that's kind of what guided me there, and it's really opened up a world and led me into the supply chain industry, which there's a lot of problems to be solved there.
Yes, very much so. And I always say that industrial engineers, we don't make things, we just make things better. Good.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for being on the show. And you talked about data-driven benefits, and it's really about business benefits for people. What I found in my experience is non-automated warehouses. When I say non-automated, probably non-robotics and that kind of thing. Their direct labor is by far the largest operating cost, and I don't know if you've seen that as well, but it's typically accounts for. Talk to people, they'll say 50 to 70% of their operating budget. And this is why the topic that you're going to talk about with this is very relevant to most warehouse leaders. Ireland, what is slotting? And more importantly, why should a warehouse leader care?
Slotting essentially in the term specific to warehouses and distribution centers really simply describes assigning every SKU to a physical location within that facility. So whether or not you have good or bad slotting happening in a facility is a totally different story, but that's the bottom line. It's where that SKU is living in the facility. So why a leader should care, I think all levels of an organization from people picking the orders at the facilities to supply chain executives should care about this because it's directly impacting the bottom line. So slotting aims to answer one question, where does this product live? So you can imagine that there's a dozen considerations and complexities when it goes into that decision. And so at the end of the day, you want the right product in the right location at the right time so that your warehouse is running as lean and as efficiently as possible.
So lean is key. And again, it gets
Mhm.
back to, it's probably like what's that principle, 5S or 6S, maybe you've heard of that, where
Mhm.
everything's got a place and everything should be in its place, that kind of thing. But when you say live, where the SKU or where the product lives, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, just physically in the facility, if you're thinking of all of the storage locations where a product would be slotted or placed onto a rack, that is essentially its home where it is stored and placed for an order picker to then walk to complete an order. Where are they going throughout the facility to actually pick and retrieve those products?
So it's more around the picking location. Is that correct? That we're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
Because I look at the whole perspective. It comes in the door, it goes into receiving, then it goes into storage, and then in some warehouses, storage and picking is not the same location. But so
Right.
that's what I want people to understand. We're talking about the pick location, not necessarily the storage location, because they can be different depending on how your warehouse is set up. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I definitely see a lot of clients will have different areas for those different purposes or processes. And what I'm focused on is the picking operation specifically, because that is where we're seeing a lot of the labor of the operations. You mentioned 50 to 70% of that labor is spent and attributed to the labor in the facility, and a lot of that is specifically tied to the picking within that operation.
Correct. That's again, so yeah, 50 to 70% is labor, but within that 50 to 70%, as you just said, a majority of that is driven by picking functions. And that's why many times I'll challenge the warehouse leader and say, most of the time I'll say, where's your best operator? And they'll say, well, they're in picking. I would challenge them just a little bit of
Hmm.
a slant from a tangent from our show, Ireland, but I would say the best people should be in receiving. And that's from an engineering
Hmm.
standpoint, because that's where everything starts. If you don't get the right product in, you don't get the right product put away, it's all going to go downhill. But that's a different topic. That's a different show. It's interesting. I learned in college the Pareto principle, which is the 80-20, which basically says in life, I learned about it from a quality standpoint, but it says 80% of the issues that you see are impacted, probably driven by 20% of the products or SKUs. Is this kind of related to that same concept?
Yeah, I definitely see a lot of operations where their majority of volume is coming from this top 20%. It's really amazing that this principle applies across so many different industries. And it's how can we target those 20% that are ultimately driving so much of the volume and demand in the facility. And then there is usually a long tail at the bottom with other SKUs that have to be slotted, but they're not as fast as movers. So we definitely don't want those taking up prime locations in your picking operations.
And some people even call it warehouse within a warehouse, because you should really
Mm.
put a lot of engineering attention on your pick locations. I mean, because you can even, for example, we were talking pre-show, you can store something. Let's say you've got a level pick shelf. You can store something on the bottom, right, almost next to the ground, depending on how the racks are configured, or you can store it all the way up on the top. So you have
Mhm.
to imagine if something's stored on the top, it might take you 2 minutes to get there. If it's stored on the bottom, you might be able to get to it quicker. But then even if it's on the bottom, it can be too low, if you know what I'm talking about from an
Mhm.
ergonomic standpoint. Do you guys talk about the concept of golden zones or pick or strike? I call them strike zones or golden zones. Does that play in?
Absolutely. That is certainly a consideration. How do you target your faster movers on that prime shelf where there's not a lot of reach above or bending down below? So it addresses ergonomics, and also you just think of the time consideration and component of having to pick an order. You don't want to be reaching or having to lift up higher in the elevation of the racking to pick a faster mover. Why would you not want those easy accessible? Think of a grocery store. You want your favorite brand right there where you can reach it and grab it. You don't want to go searching up and down throughout the shelving to find what you're looking for.
Well, you said bending over and reaching out and things. That's traditional industrial engineering, the old time motion studies. I don't know if you're old enough to
Mhm.
know what that is, but that's when I went to college. That's one of the things we studied. You got a stopwatch and you're looking at grabbing and all that stuff. But then that's really what it is.
Oh, yes. No, we did a fun time study when I was in college. We observed the bagel shop on campus, and we were doing a time study of orders processing because there was always a line out the door. So we wanted to understand, how could you make this process more efficient? There's got to be a faster, better way to
Yeah.
get your bagels.
That reminds me of one of my, now I'm going to nerd out on you, but queuing theory. When you talked about long lines,
Mm.
queuing theory was one of the more interesting topics that I studied in university as well. So, but I'm getting off on too far of a tangent. But back to this, people might be looking at my screen and saying, "What has he got an ice scraper on behind him?" And that's not traditional for the show, but it's because it related. When I was talking to Ireland pre-show, I gave her the story, the example. This is a product that when I was observing a warehouse of an automotive distributor in Florida, and it was June, and I was walking through the warehouse, and we're speaking about strike zones or the golden zone. I was just looking around at eye level, and I looked over and saw a case of these sitting on the shelf, like right where I was, pick level, and I had to talk to the manager and say, why do you, number one, why do you have these in Florida, and number two, why do you have them in June? in Florida? And then number three, why are they right at this prime location? That this is probably the most valuable property that you have in terms of the warehouse. So I think that's the reason I got my little prop back there. But that's a great example, I think. It kind of relates to, I know something you talked about, Ireland, is the what's the concept in a real life scenario, the kitchen, laying out your kitchen or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. I like to think of slotting just in practical terms so everybody can understand it in a day to day. You're going into your kitchen to make lunch or breakfast, and the supplies that you need, where are they stored? You're probably not storing your mixing bowl that you're going to use to make your scrambled eggs all the way up in the very top behind your fine china or whatever it is. You're probably going to have it somewhere easily accessible. Your spatula better be in that drawer right next to the stove so that you can make your eggs efficiently. You're not searching around and scrambling to scramble your eggs. That's just a simple example, thinking through logically where would I want to store the things that I'm reaching for the most in the kitchen. Apply that same thinking and principle to a warehouse. You want your operators to be able to pick the SKUs that have the highest demand very quickly and efficiently throughout their day.
It has to be a business decision, business benefit. I mean, we're not slotting just to say we did it and it's fun, because it does take a little bit of work. I mean, you guys
Mhm.
come in. Well, how often do you slot or reslot a warehouse? Do I do it when I set it up and that's it? I never talk to you again, or how does that work?
I sure hope not, because I like to also think of slotting as the slow drip. It's a silent killer in the facility. You don't always notice that there is an issue until you actually get into the data and understand it. So sometimes with clients, depending on the industry, maybe they're doing quarterly reslots or maybe monthly activity. And then we have some clients who actually do a daily reslot. They come in and they have a list of prioritized moves because their demand is just moving at such a fast rate that they always need to be adjusting and optimizing those locations in their facility. So we can really utilize the data to then drive and decide how often that activity needs to occur.
It's a tool, I guess, that sits along with a warehouse management system, or, and I'm talking about your specific solution itself, not just the process. But
Sure.
how does it work with other systems?
So Slot 3D itself is a standalone tool. So if you want to just get the data from your system and import it into Slot 3D, we can create the models there for your slotting strategy essentially. But we do interface with WMS and ERP systems. So we have API connections available. This is getting a little technical, but that is obviously a topic as integration. So we have that
Hmm.
option available. And then we have some intermediary type of tools and data automation with built-in functionality in the software. So you could actually just have those data flows and refreshes happening at whatever frequency or occurrence that you decide. So making that process as streamlined and simple, because where we need a lot of operators and engineers and continuous improvement leaders in the warehouses is they're actually currently doing their slotting manually in Excel, and that's very time consuming and laborious activity. So,
Yeah, that's a great point. I know I've done Excel based slotting before. Just it'll take half a day, whatever. But that can become a hassle if you have to do it every day, especially if you're in maybe a fashion industry where products are
mhm.
changing. And that can happen one day. It's hot, the product is selling out the door, and next thing you know, you can't give it away. What's the break point? I mean, when do I need a slotting application like Slot 3D versus just do it myself?
Yeah, I think it would definitely depend on your current workload and resources available. If you are getting to the point where you can't even think about slotting because it's too much of a time suck, but you realize the importance and value of it, that's a good indicator. Maybe I need a tool to automate this functionality for me. I have the strategies and the logic in place. And now I just need to automate it so that I really don't even have to touch it. My operations team out on the floor can just log in and get a daily report or however often report of what should be done. So it really makes that decision making more accessible to the whole team and allows them to drive decisions and actually implement and execute suggestions.
Yeah, one thing you said that I agree wholeheartedly as a consultant is rather than just applying automation, fix the process first. I think you said that.
Hmm.
If you didn't say that, I said you said that. So that's because that's what
Yeah, I totally agree.
that's because we call it paving the cow paths. If not, you're just going to be doing the wrong things faster. So I'm glad you said that specifically. As we talk about the size of an operation, maybe it has to do with the benefit or the value. So I talked about value earlier, and there are four things of value I think is where most warehouses can see it. And it's the travel reduction time, 15 to 40%. And we'll talk about each one of these. Productivity gains 10 to 30% more picks per hour. Order accuracy 5 to 20% fewer errors, and then capacity increase 5 to 15%. And those are just industry averages. So let's talk about these. So obviously, the more people you have, the more travel reductions and productivity gains going to make a difference. Can you talk about these? So as I mentioned, the 10 to 30% more picks per hour.
Yeah, if you think about the picking productivity and kind of take it a step back and look at travel. So if we're thinking through the travel aspect, pickers typically spend 50 to 60% of their entire shift just simply traveling. So that is a non-value add activity because they're not scanning, they're not picking, they're not packaging or configuring a pallet. That's just walking. So that means that for every dollar that you spend on the labor for a picker, more than half of that isn't even actually touching a single product in the facility. So if you want to think of travel in general, it's the tax that you pay for the poor SKU placement in the facility. Kind of going back to your Pareto example, if you want to think through and target, okay, these 20%, if you just think of your faster movers and how that could impact the slotting and the travel component, if you just targeted that, that will then have a ripple effect on the whole facility. So just a really simple example to kind of start to think through the travel component and time. If you think about a shift and there's 120 picks that happen in that whole shift, let's say that you have poor SKU placement and that causes even just 20 seconds of extra travel to be considered or wasted on each pick. So that's 2,400 seconds in a shift or 40 minutes. And that's just for one picker. So now if you can multiply that out, even if you just have 10 pickers, that's 6.5 hours of labor cost that was just unnecessary movement. And so you just think through that and then the logic of with those 6.5 hours, if I had better SKU placement and slotting, I could have been doing so much more actual picking. So therefore that increases your picking productivity and efficiencies in the facility. And it's really crazy when you just kind of zoom out and think about even just 20 seconds of extra walking can have that big of a ripple effect on the operation.
And you're right. It's picking productivity has more to do with travel than it does the physical picking process itself. Because, if some of these warehouses are what, like 1 million square feet, they're pretty big. Maybe a
Oh,
billion square feet, but they're big. And if you have to walk around, people get tired, I guess, from walking around. I'd be curious to see how many steps people get
mhm.
from doing the picking. But again,
I always want to do that exercise. I think that would be so funny to try to see how many steps they actually get. But yeah, the operations are some even large scale. But even if you think on a small scale, it can still have an impact in a small facility. Wasted travel is wasted
oh,
travel.
good. I
So
like that. Good answer. Good answer. Thing with travel, I do presentations and keynotes for boring industry group people. I've got an example where I do a little map and I say, here's a rectangle warehouse and it's 100,000 square feet long. And I lay it out ABC. I say,
hmm
just randomly, if you put any product away wherever there's a location, on
hmm
average, I have to walk to the middle of the warehouse 100% of the time on average. But
Right.
if you do ABC, then you say, okay, the A items are 20% of the product, but they account for 80% of the walking, right? Back to Pareto. And you put those in
hmm
the front. That means now I don't have to walk 500 feet a day. I have to walk 250, and that's the thing you do. So that's a fun
Exactly.
mathematical exercise that you can actually map out.
Yeah, I love that example. It really just helps to simplify it because in general, you think about an operation in a warehouse, it could seemingly be functioning fine. You're getting orders out the door, but you're really missing out on a big opportunity if you don't think through the slotting and just impacting even that 20% of SKUs.
And what's one of our industrial engineering favorite philosophies is don't confuse activity with productivity. Just because you see
That's a good
people
one.
driving around or walking around doesn't necessarily mean they're being productive. So yeah, picking labor can be improved significantly. I would say that that right there could be the benefit of doing slotting exercises. And then what
Mhm.
were the others I talked about? Order accuracy, 5 to 20% improvements. To me, that's a little bit soft. Yeah, I think you can get better with order accuracy, but that has to do with customer satisfaction. And how
Mhm.
that happens, I think, is more around which products are in you don't want to store the same products next to each other, those types of things. And then the last one, I think, which is could be a big savings, is capacity utilization improvements, 5 to 15%. If you can squeeze out more space without having to go out and expand or go to a 3PL, that's going to be a big savings as well. Do you have any comments around either of those, order accuracy or capacity?
Oh, certainly. So when you think about just the cost avoidance of having to expand to a new facility by just your existing footprint, how can you maximize the space and what you have right in front of you? And that's just kind of a philosophy in life in general that I like to think through is what do you have right in front of you? What are the tools and resources? That's why I think slotting is so important. It's really simply just moving the products within a different place within the facility itself. So there's a lot of gains to be had by just maximizing the existing space and footprint that you have in your operation.
That's it. Cost avoidance. I like that one too.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, that's good. So I do think there is and I've seen it before. There's very tangible value in being proactive and taking an engineered approach to slotting. But before we kind of start wrapping up, any other discussion points around slotting that you'd like to share?
Whenever you start to think through slotting and it's all of these considerations, there's certain things that may be more specific to an operation, like avoiding crushability when you're building out a pallet, or you have a seasonality, so you have to plan for certain events and peak seasons, or like we've talked about the golden zone. So when you start to think through it, there are a lot of layers and complexities to slotting. So I think sometimes slotting can be daunting and it's maybe not always a focus or a priority because it's just something that seemingly is working fine in the facility. But like I said, I think it is that silent, slow drip of your warehouse resources that really you should reevaluate and take a look at, hey, are we actually properly slotted in our facility, or are there gains to be had by addressing this issue?
Okay, I like that slow drip because it is. You're right. It's something that it's not really costing a lot of money per drip, but it continues
Mhm.
to do it, and then that cost adds up a lot. And I got my water bill last month, and had a leak in my one of my toilet tanks, and I figured out how much those slow drips cost.
There you go.
So
Perfect
yeah,
example.
I wasn't going to use that one, but hey, ice scrapers and toilets.
There you go.
So Ireland, before we wrap, just tell me a little bit about Slot 3D. This wasn't an infomercial, but I want to know if your product does some of these things or how you guys go about it or what it is.
Yeah, so I mentioned how I think slotting can often become complex and daunting. So where we're really positioning our slotting software and tool is to make slotting smarter and simpler. So for an existing warehouse, how we approach slotting is establishing the baseline or the current state. So everything within Slot 3D when we think about the slotting foundation and principles, things like the dimensional fit of an item, the demand of the item, we essentially relate that back and tie it to a cost. So, an economic framework and mindset when we are going and trying to solve the slotting problem. So, essentially, we want to look at okay, in this SKUs where they're currently living or slotted today, how much does it cost to pick that SKU from that location, replenish it, the physical space that's taking up, what storage cost is associated there? And then also the main theme that we've talked about, travel. How much travel is associated with where the SKU is at today? So I think it's very essential to slotting to establish where you're at, understand that baseline. So then we can then run the optimization and give your operation teams a prioritized list. And with economics being tied back to it, it's very beneficial. Money is the universal language. Everybody can
Mhm.
understand dollars and cents. So if you tie a SKU and an economic value to a location, it makes it very clear on why you would make a move or rehome that SKU in the facility. So it gives your operation teams that data-driven decision of why we should make this move. It's prioritized by how much you'll save by actually doing so. So you can have this comprehensive view of not only the savings and cost, but how much time you're saving as well as distance that you're not having to traverse throughout the facility. That's the foundation is the economic aspect, but we don't just stop there. We want to empower you with a visualization. So a lot of leaders and supply chain executives love a 3D view or a picture. So tying in the visual component, so you have the actual representation of the facility, and then you can then see how a slotting change would impact your facility. So through the economics and then the visuals, it's kind of the perfect recipe to really address slotting and allow you to execute slotting plans and strategies that will save you time and money.
So it'll do simulations for you before you actually make the move?
So we're modeling different scenarios. So if you wanted to say, here's where I'm at today, what if I applied a golden zone? You can then have a scenario for golden zone. Okay, now I can compare the cost of today versus if I implement the golden zone. So giving you that direct comparison as well as, okay, let's visualize that. Where are my fast movers now slotted in the facility? So there's some different layers and levers that you can pull within the tool to before you even go out and make a move or move anything out on the floor, you can see that direct impact in the tool itself.
And it sounds like an interesting, I mean, you got to probably graphs and you said data driven. I like data driven. It'd be
Hmm.
fun. It'd be interesting to see. We're not going to look at it today, but if somebody wanted to take a look and maybe a deeper dive, how would they go about that? Get in
Yeah,
touch.
reach out to me directly. You can find me on LinkedIn at Ireland Herder. Send me a message. We'll get some time on the calendar. Or you can go to slot3d.com and just take a look there, book a meeting from our website, get some more information. But just in general, want people to start thinking about slotting and how it's potentially a slow drip in their facility and they might need to address that problem.
That's great. So if you have a slow drip, or even if you don't, I'm going to put it this way. If you don't even think you have a slow drip, you should probably still call. It reminds me of that joke that about mosquitoes. With if you hear a mosquito, you don't have anything to worry about because it's a male mosquito and they don't bite. If you don't hear a mosquito, then you need to be concerned because females bite. So, so if you don't hear a mosquito, be concerned you're going to get bitten. Well, thank you for that. I think everybody that hasn't done a slotting analysis, even conceptually, I'm not telling you to go out and buy software because you got to improve your processes first. But if you haven't done anything, at least strategically thought about it, I would encourage you to reach out to Slot 3D and give Ireland a call and see if she can tell you a little bit more about it. Thank you again for investing a part of your day to listen to the Supply Chain Doctor, where we strive to bring you new ideas from thought leaders such as Ireland and new solution concepts that may not be on your radar. I'm Chris Barnes, the Supply Chain Doctor, helping save the world one warehouse at a time. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment with potential topics for us to investigate on a future show. And if you have a warehouse that needs improving, also give me a shout. If you take a walk through a warehouse and you see items like this in your golden zone bin locations, and it's this time of year, especially in this region, you might consider your reslotting opportunities.